Got no time to plan out your Dungeons and Dragons campaign? Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Just spend the time you need to figure out a few little things here and there. I want to talk about the modularity of a campaign. And I want to think about it like a city, but more like Sim City, right? So you start off the game with a flat plane and a bunch of money, and then you plop down different buildings, and then put some roads around it, and then supply some power to it, and then animated cars start driving on the roads, and trains start moving along the train tracks, and the lights go on buildings, and you decide to have commercial here, industrial here, and residential there, and you put your power surrounded by trees so it sucks up those emissions. But the point is that you're not putting the entire city down at once. I'm sure, if I remember, there's a way of doing that in SimCity, just jacking up the money and then pausing it and then just laying it all down at once. But I'm talking about as you're playing this game, a regular game of SimCity, you're slowly building it out, and you're kind of organically growing your city, even though you're sort of in God mode putting these things down. And you can think of a Dungeons & Dragons campaign exactly like that. You have this part of it, and it goes down here. And you have this part of it, and it goes down here. But this part of it can also go over here. And this part of it can also go over here. So you have these general ideas in your head of these different parts of the campaign. And what are the parts? Well, the parts are a village. And then the village itself has individual parts. A tavern here, a blacksmith there, a town hall there, or a longhouse, or it's got a farm on the edge of the village, or it's got a road leading east, or does the road lead east? Maybe it leads north because your characters start heading north, and at the end of this street is just a little hut, and there's a guy in there, and he says something. Or in the tavern, there's somebody that has a concern about something happening on the edge of town, but they don't go to the tavern. So now this person is in the blacksmith buying some horseshoes. Or a farmer comes rushing into the longhouse saying that their child is missing and that they were taken by cultists. Or they never go to the longhouse, and as they're leaving town, this farmer rushes in. And there's all kinds of ways to take these little concepts and plop them down as they're needed. And the idea that, people don't want to necessarily be railroaded into something is kind of removed by this modularity, because it doesn't have to be a farmer who's missing their child and the cultist. It could just be that there's a bandit gang on the outskirts of the province that the town is in, and they are on the northern edge. And these bandits are said to be using a magical sword that slices through metal or something like that, right? Something to entice the people. And it doesn't have to be any one of those things. You can think of these different hooks and have them ready in case they're needed. And when someone mentions, I want to do this, I want to do that, well, you can modularly, if that's a word, plop it down, the idea that you have, around the thing that they want to do. So, let's say your characters want to get on a ship and explore with a band of freebooters, right? So, then, this cultist sanctuary or temple or underground dungeon maze can be found on one of the islands that they happen to stop at, or on the edge of a coast of some unknown land that they happen to stop at, and one of their crew members is captured. And the treasure that they're seeking, some great gem that needs to activate this automaton to give them the map to some great lost city, can be found on the way to this village that they've been traveling to because they've heard of it. and they wanted to go there. And none of this was connected at first, but you connect these things. So you take one thing that they want, and you take one thing that you have that can connect, and they have their little puzzle pieces sort of plopped together, and you're dropping these things in as your players are making choices. And you don't have to think of or write down all of this campaign, that this thing happens, then this thing happens, and A to B, because that's how these written adventures are. And in fact, you should take these written adventures, you should read these written adventures, and you should just remember that there's something in these written adventures that can apply to a situation that your characters are choosing, right? The players are deciding to go this way, and it's similar to something in one of these adventures. So you rip it out, and you drop it down into what they're doing. And to go back to the village, you don't even have to write down this village and its name or its location or who the villages are. If you have basic points of a village, you can use them in any place, and you can just swap out the names, because there's maybe an inn in most villages, or there's maybe a tavern in some other types of villages, or there's a blacksmith in about half of villages, and there's maybe someone who is a woodsman in forest villages, and maybe there's a midwife in a village that has a high population and a lot of farmers. So you can take these different NPCs and, again, modularly put them in. They don't have to have a specific description. They just have to have an archetype that they are, and then you throw a description on top of them, and it can be a dwarf, a human, an elf, an orc, whatever, depending on what type of village that they're in. And then the buildings themselves are based on the occupations that are there and how big you think you want the village to be, and how big your players want the village to be. Because what if your players want to go sell some treasure or trade some treasure for some other stuff? Well, then you're going to need a town at the very least, or a city. So then you're taking a series of villages that would be haphazardly thrown together anyway, because there's no city planning. So as they come in to the city, you don't have to have the whole city planned out. It's going to take them a while to walk through the city. So you just take a bunch of villages and plop them down. And you know, the blacksmith doesn't always have to be beside the inn. The inn doesn't even have to be there. There doesn't have to be a town council, because there instead would just be, I don't know, an alderman or something like that that reports to the city council or something like that, right? There would be city guards, and they would be patrolling throughout the city. There may be guards at the gates to the city, and that's generally where the players would start at. Usually the 4 gates of the city, which would be compass points. Usually, sometimes there's just one. If it's a small city, if it's a medium city, maybe there's 2 gates that go along a road, right? And then if it's a coastal city, there's going to be some docks probably, or something approximating a way for ships to land. Maybe if it's a poor city, there isn't docks. Maybe it's just a cove, and they use gangplanks to get from the ship to the rocky shore, and then they walk into the city from there. It depends, and you can, on the fly, decide what type of city this is based on the way that your players have been traversing. And so your players have been walking through this rocky shoal coastline, and there's a forest on the edge of it, and then as they come around this shore, they can see a bay, and on the other side of the bay they can see a city, and they can decide, we're going to go to that city. Or they decide they're not going to that city, and they're going to head east, further inland, further into the forest, because they've heard of something there. At which point, what was the point of designing this entire city, right? At some point, they might come back to that city, and that's the point where you start designing the city as they walk into the city. Same thing can be done with dungeons, especially the smaller dungeons, especially the very classic going after the cultists, and they have a temple, and underneath the temple are some rooms, which is a dungeon, but not technically. It's just a structure that has a rock or stone basement, right? And you can decide as they're heading towards it, well, it's got an entrance. Maybe it's got two entrances if it's a little bit larger. And then that entrance is going to have some sort of foyer. And it'll be utilized as probably a defensive point to prevent people from entering. If they are an aggressive cultist, if they're just off in the middle of nowhere and they've bothered no one, they're probably not using it for defense. They're probably just using it as the main place of worship of whatever evil god or good god or whatever they're worshiping. So you take that, and then inside there would be an altar, a place for an altar, and then there'd probably be another room off of that that would have the vestments or the things that would be used for their worship. And then there may be a hallway and maybe some sleeping quarters for the priest and maybe the people that assist the priest. And then there may be some other rooms downstairs for storage, for, any sort of ales or food stuffs, but also some other rooms that may have been used now for other cultist members to sleep in. And maybe there's a secret room where they keep their valuables, where they keep their treasure. And that would be, the final room. But none of this is necessarily laid out exactly the same. It's laid out as your players are moving in, and you decide how the story flows and which way it flows better. Does the entrance just have a long hallway that then leads to a foyer, and then inside the foyer there's the altar and off, or maybe the vestments come first? I don't know. It depends. And maybe it's not a temple. Maybe it's just a shrine of some kind. So maybe the altar is in the basement, and maybe the shrine is the thing. Maybe the statue in the middle in this large room. And maybe that's where the big battle takes place. And there's smaller battles after that. That's the whole point. Is you can take little bits of things and plop them in. And if you know how rooms work and what things could be in rooms, then you can plop in a room of a certain type as the thing happens. And you don't have to plan all of this out. You can think about these things as you're going to sleep, or as you're taking a walk, or as you're working, and you don't have to have your entire brain power focused on your task. And when you sit down at the table, you can use these things and recall these things and then add them together like you're building a Lego set. And that's how you can save a lot of time on your Dungeons & Dragons campaign and the adventures that you do, and you don't have to write down a whole lot. It's just sort of habit you can kind of build over time. At first, it's going to be a bit of a stumble for you. You're going to make some mistakes, and you're going to get a little bit nervous and then forget something, and then also think of something after the fact, but you can't add it in now because now a room is just appearing out of nowhere. That's fine. As time progresses, you'll get better at it. It's kind of like, I guess, doing YouTube videos. You can stumble over things, you can forget things, and when you talk off the cuff and you don't have a script, you kind of can look like an idiot, and that's fine. You can look like an idiot. Your players will let you look like an idiot. It's fine. They want to play the game. They're going to be very forgiving. So just try out some of these concepts and let me know in the comments below. Have a good day.